Hey Julia, how you doing? So today we are chatting about how to create goals using pleasure, and I'm just going to leap right in if you're happy for me to do that. So I'm going to throw out a few different terms that we've chatted about in terms of pussy and business and creating pleasure, and just have you share or riff a little bit off of what I'm saying, if that's okay. So you help women to create pleasure in their business by activating their pussy power. So pussy and business, not two words that you often hear together. So should we start there and see where things go? So how do you bring her into your business?
Yeah, so I think even like before that, like how you do it is kind of setting up the why you do it,
Okay.
so that people can get a little frame of like, oh yeah, like I need that. So I think the way we've been taught to do business traditionally is through a very like masculine approach, which naturally leaves pleasure out of the equation. It's very like pushing, hustling, proving, competing, like logical, linear way of doing things, very strategic, formulaic. And there's nothing wrong with those things. I just find that for women, it's not sustainable. It's just not how we do our best and how we thrive. I think some of it is great. But then there was this whole like missing piece that I didn't see anyone really teaching of like, how do you really like let business feel good so that it's sustainable? Because here's the thing, like whether you're in the corporate world or the entrepreneurial world, if you're going to burn out, that's no good to anybody. And like, we need you there. And so it has to be sustainable, right? And for me, the solution to that was like, oh, there has to be pleasure. Like we have to enjoy it. Like as women, we're built for pleasure. Like literally your body has a part on it that is just there for pleasure. Like the clit serves no other purpose than pleasure. So it's like, oh, yeah, this should belong in business as well. And I'll just say now, like, it's not even just like a sexual pleasure thing. That's one piece of what I talk about and what I bring into the work. But it's just like an overall enjoyment of what you're doing. So I think that's important to say so that people are like, oh, like there is another way that you can do things and it doesn't lead to a road of burnout, of like questioning yourself, of pushing so hard that like you lose track of who you even are and what you even want. And so how you do that for me has been to really focus on this lens of pleasure, learning what do we like, sensual, sexual, not at all, like what brings us joy, what feels really good, and then also activating pussy. So this is like both physically and energetically our source of power. It's creativity, it's sensuality, it's pleasure, it's our intuition. It can connect us to a higher power. And I just think like when you mix that into business, you start to like have these ideas and these ways of doing things that then feel really good and are sustainable and you desire to do even more and more of and lead you to the coolest things.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I love it. I love it. And I love the words that you're using, like intuition, pleasure. That it's just things that you don't think about so much in business. And yet when you bring them into business, like it's a complete game changer, especially for women. So we had a chat last week, and we were chatting a little bit about women and in between spaces. I was wondering if you could touch on that a little bit, because I think as women we do live in the in between spaces a lot of the time. So when you're talking about bringing all of these things in, that sounds really awesome, but maybe some women are wondering, well, how do I do that? Because right now I feel, you know, like I'm just trying to find a little bit of a gap in my market for me. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So just so I'm clear, you mean like when we're like, don't be too much, but like be this and like be this. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So as women, like we perpetually live in a trap where it's like, be sexy, but not too sexy, be beautiful, but not too beautiful, be smart, but not too smart, like work hard, but not too hard. Like, and it's just disastrous and leaves us literally with this much space. And so part of this is also learning that it is safe to create your own space and take up space in whatever area that you're in. And it comes with a lot of healing, quite honestly, of all of these like patterning and conditioning and beliefs that we've had our entire life. Like you probably learned these from a very young age, like ask for things, but like don't be needy. And so we tend to fall into then like this conditioning. And I learned, so it used to like, I used to think it was just like the good girl conditioning, like the people pleaser. But recently I had my mind blown by one of my teachers, Kasha Urbaniak, of like the independent woman is just another version of the good girl, because both
oh my gosh,
are like, don't ask for help. Yeah, do it all yourself, take care of everybody else. And it's again this trap, and you're like, oh great, so here I am doing it all by myself. So part of this is like, if you're going to do this, you have to realize that, like, especially as women, I don't feel like we were meant to do this alone. So find some people, especially if you're going to go down this new path of like adding pussy and pleasure into your business, because a lot of people may not like be there yet or quite understand it. So I think that can be really helpful. Find teachers and spaces where you can explore this that are safe, that are going to allow you to like explore and heal all of this wounding and conditioning. Because the last thing we want to do is like build this like faux house of cards of pleasure, like on top of a foundation where you don't believe that you like deserve to feel good and that it can feel good, or you might have unresolved trauma, or like there's so many different things. So I think that's really important, is like knowing, and just for yourself too, permission to like be gentle and go slow. Again, we're not taking the masculine approach of like, I have to fix this and like figure this out tomorrow. And like, this is a new way of living and being, and you're going to be on this journey your whole life. You're going to constantly be learning and course correcting and doing pleasure research of like, what do I even like? Like most women I find at the end of the day, you're like, I don't know what I like. Like, I don't even know. If someone asked you in the bedroom, outside the bedroom, like, what do you like? Tell me exactly how you would do this, or like, what do you like? You'd be like, I don't know. Like, so, I don't know. Sometimes I like
this. I love this point. I absolutely love this point. And actually, I wanna encourage our ladies who are listening to write themselves a list. We were talking about this the other day. Write themselves a list of what they know for sure they like, because I think that is something that will probably surprise them, actually. I know when I first sat down and tried that, and like looking at what do I actually enjoy, I was vague. In fact, when I looked back on the list, I was just vague, and I was like, kind of nice. I sort of enjoy that when it's like this, but I wasn't really specific. And actually, you can get really specific when you really check in around it. But as women, I guess perhaps we haven't. That's not something we've been encouraged to look at.
No. Because I think it also couples with this idea that we don't get to ask for what we want and what we need. So then we don't know how to articulate it. Mm-hmm. And so learning how to like, one, what do you like? And then two, how do you articulate and communicate that? And then how do you feel comfortable and safe asking for that? And then receiving that. Mm-hmm. Like there's so many different pieces here, but I think a great first place is just like, what do I even like? It can include anything. Like you could be out and be like, oh, I like blue doors, or like, I really like when men move around me on the sidewalk, or, you know, like it just like put a list of things you like. And you'll start to be like, oh, interesting. And then it also helps you like discern like what you don't like and what you're not going to tolerate. And you can ask in a nice way of like, oh, like, I really don't like when you do that. Can we do this instead? But again, like, we just don't even know how to like have these conversations. And this place is like, I think the easiest place to start at. So that it doesn't feel like overwhelming. Like, oh my God, I now have to ask for everything.
Yeah, I think that sounds really, really fantastic. Um, I know for me, one of the things, and maybe you can have I know you've also looked at this work. One of the things that was really huge in my revelation and opening around pussy and empowerment was actually a book called Pussy.
A reclamation.
Surprisingly, and that was really helpful in just reconnecting to that part of myself and that pleasure part. But if we maybe we can talk a little bit about pussy itself, but maybe because every woman has one. But maybe if we can talk a little bit about the cycle side of things to start off with, and how you found that useful in business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'm like, where do we start? Okay, first of all, definitely read Pussy, A Reclamation by Regina Thomas Howard.
I'll stick a link below.
Yeah, perfect. So I think it ties into the same thing of like the broader idea of like women are cyclical and we have hormones that work in a different way than men. And so like while it's easy for them, they kind of stay like one steady thing. We don't. We like literally our bodies and our hormones and everything changes multiple times a month. And so at first it can seem like that's like a hindrance or it can take us out. And when you don't realize what's happening, it's like, oh my God, like, why can't I be productive and like excited and outgoing and all these things like 24/7? And we start to like compare ourselves that we can't do things the way that someone else is doing them when we're literally not built to do it that way. I think learning this starts to like give some permission. And I feel like you could also speak to like a little bit of how you take people through. You have some like really cool examples that also I think can help people get an idea of like just what this like looks like and how detailed we can get. But just in general, it's like recognizing that there's going to be times you feel different. And if you can start to like also build that into your business practices around like, or even just like permission to not feel the same way every single day, or like some days you're going to want to be really forward facing in business and some days you need to pull back, you need to be creative, you need to like regenerate, all of those different things. And then when you realize those are coinciding with what your body's naturally doing, you can use that as like a tool, and you see pussy as like not something that takes you out, because we've also been conditioned to like hate her for giving us a period and for like, you know, being in pain or, you know, having our energy dip or our mood swings or whatever. And it's like, wait, those are actually your superpowers. Like when you learn to harness that, like game on, watch the fuck out. And to me, I'm like, there's a reason why we've been taught to do it like men, because it actually suppresses our power.
Yeah.
And when a woman's in her full power, like,
yeah. I love that you're talking about that. I love that you're saying about how we've been taught that our pussy is mostly about pain and this unpleasant process of having a period, and that it's actually our superpower. Again, I mean, I think I began to tap into this properly probably only a couple of years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. And when I finally, because I've done all sorts of spiritual practices and they are fantastic and I'm not knocking any of them, I'm really grateful for them, but there's been nothing like tapping into that part of myself and listening to that wave and that rhythm. And it's literally almost like magic in terms of what flows and what happens and how well I work and the people I meet and how everything just seems to sort of flourish and open up, which, you know, if you'd have told me before, I'd have been like, really? But actually it really does work. Like I've actually tried it and applied it and seen the difference. And I'm, which is why I'm excited to share this and have you speak about such a positive, powerful process for women. I mean, what was your, why did you connect to it so powerfully? Can I ask you, what was it that kind of got you to that tipping point? Like for me, I was seeking to connect to my creativity, and it was sort of a progression of lots of creative stuff, and then I was like, oh, creativity, sacral chakra, because I'm thinking about the spiritual side of things, so that's also sexuality. So that's when I began to dive into that side of things. So that was my kind of, you know, sort of progression into it. But what made you kind of leap into it yourself? What was your story?
Yeah, so I'd been doing like coaching and business coaching for a while, and I'm always just kind of like, okay, what's my truth? Like, what is missing here? What do I want more of? And one day I was just in the car and it was like, you need to talk about sexuality when it comes to like money and business and marketing. And I was like, what? Like, who said that? Like, what's happening? And I was like, no, I don't really know anything about that. Like, me? But it was like the clearest thing I've ever heard of like, this is it. Like, it's time, go do this. Like, this is what your life's work is gonna be about. And I was like, okay. So I don't fully know. I guess I was just like in the space to be ready to hear that message. And then I was like, okay, cool. How do I start this work? What does that even look like? And then I realized that it was like connecting to pussy and sexuality and doing all of that work around it. But also like, so my grandma did some similar work around like sacred sexuality. And I kind of, I don't know, in my own way, think that like she gave me a little nudge and was like, well, someone's going to continue this in my family. And was like, your turn. And I was like, okay, great. Like literally when I called my dad and I was like, I'm signing up for a year-long sex coach training. He's like, cool. Like I knew somebody was going to have to like work because he has 3 daughters. So he's like, I'm not surprised. Like, okay, great, cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
I guess it's like also in my blood, apparently. It's just like, this is work with like, there's so much, and my grandma worked a lot with like men and men's sexuality. That was kind of
how did you, I mean, I don't know if you ever had, did you ever have the thing of your pussy's a place of pain and bringing it into pleasure? So what, if you don't mind my asking, like what was the cycle like for you, bringing it, turning it around and bringing it into a place of pleasure?
Oh man, I mean, I still feel like it's a journey. There's so much conditioning, even in this conversation, of realizing like how the only messages I got around menstruation are like negative. Like, and that's only one part of it, but like I have kidney stones, so I had chronic UTIs, and then I would be over medicated, and then they would lead to a yeast infection. And it was like I constantly was like, I hate my pussy. Like, why? Or I thought like she hated me. So we had this relationship that was like, no, mortal enemies. Like, all you do is cause trouble. Like, this is not something I want. And then of course, and then you bleed once a month. So like, what is your problem? Like, why? Literally, I can't even tell you how many times I said like, why do you hate me? That's fucked up. Like, what?
I'm laughing.
No, but I think, and the thing is, this is so common, and people are like, don't even realize that you could have a different relationship because it's not shown or modeled anywhere else. And then it's like, wait, okay, so we talk negative to her, but like, we never think to like talk in a nice way, like, hey, how are you today? Like, we only address her when something's wrong and not going how we have been told it should. So when I got into this work around, like, I knew that I was going to bring sexuality into my business and the type of work that I did, I went through really intensive year-long training. And the first like few months are all healing your own stuff and then coaching each other on your own stuff. And I quickly realized like this relationship needed to be healed. Like, that it was so manufactured and I was so deep that it was controlling everything else. And I was like, I really thought she was the enemy. And it's like, well, why would I invite her to run my business if I thought she was like an evil bitch that just wanted me to have like pain and headaches and like just feel terrible all the time. So I really had to work on that and be like, oh, okay, like there's so many different things that go into this here. But even realizing that she has like a mind of her own, that she has her own yeses and nos, like that we can slow down and talk to her and listen to her and ask her questions. Like, I had never, ever seen or considered that before.
And not just,
it's always like,
just with anything, right?
With anything, but even sexually, like we're not even taught that sexually. So then don't even try to bring that into like anywhere else in life because we don't have like a basis of knowing how to do that. Yeah. And so that was like such a process for me to be
I
able
feel,
to like build
sorry,
that. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like if we're talking about this side of things, I'd love to talk about pleasure lenses, but before we dive into that, I'd love to just talk a little bit about shame, because I know probably for a lot of women, we're talking about sex, we're talking about their pussy, we're talking about pleasure, and you know, especially if there's this you know, thing of women not knowing what they like, there's possibly, I know I had it when I first started looking into this, quite a bit of shame around, oh God, am I allowed to ask for what I actually want, what I actually desire? Like, is that okay? So let's talk to shame a little bit first,
Cool.
and then let's definitely go all out with pleasure lenses, because that's way more exciting and where we want to go with all of this. But let's talk about shame.
But we have to address the shame piece. So, oh man, again, like where to even start? Yeah, like we've been taught that like our pussies are supposed to look and smell and behave a certain way. And basically, if it's not Barbie, it's like shame, 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 shame. And guess what happens when you ignore pussy and you don't have a connection with her? Like things go sideways. And like when we don't even know what we like, then it's like we're just spinning out. Like we're literally lost. And what most of us do is just disconnect. Right. And so then the idea of connecting, you're like, oh God, I have to learn all of these things. Like we're not even taught like sensually or sexually, like to learn what we like. It's always about like pleasing men. And there's this lens of like, this is what our pleasure is for men. Right. And so when you learn how to flip it, you're like, oh, like, I don't even know what I like, or I don't even know how I would describe this to a partner, whether it's a man or a woman, doesn't even matter. But I think like, yeah, the shame of like not knowing what you like it's a lot. Like it can feel like a lot to deal with. And I think again, this is like being gentle of like this whole process. You're going to realize like how much stuff is tied up here. I feel like you made a really good point, and I'm trying to like come back to it. I don't remember what it is, but we'll get there eventually. Because there's like a million things. Go ahead.
Which bit is you half thinking?
Oh, we were talking about like when you were mentioning that of it was something around like, oh, I know what it is. Okay, so there's this piece for me that was really hard, and I see this come up with a lot of women as well. So I'll just like speak to my experience because I think it translates. Of like, it's not safe to ask for what we want, because we have, again, these like beliefs and conditioning that we can't be like needy, that's really gross and unattractive, and having like wants as a woman is like too much, right? We're supposed to kind of be these like creatures that just exist with no needs. So one belief that was honestly so huge for me shifting this was that men love to please and serve me. And this went against like all my conditioning. Like all my conditioning was that like, I don't need men. I can do everything by myself. Like men don't want women that are like needy or complicated or high maintenance or any of those things. And obviously I'm speaking to this from a position of being a heterosexual woman who like, this is mostly my realm of how I do, but I still think this even applies to like a non-sexual relationship completely. Like you can think about our dads, you can think about your coworkers or anything like that, of like, we've just been taught that like, that's the dynamic between men and women.
I want to put my hands up because I'm like, so yes, I definitely I have the exact same things in my life as well. Exactly the same. So yes.
Yeah. And so it's like, until we start to like pull apart all of these pieces and shift some of those beliefs as well, then it's like, that's what's going to make a big difference in you feeling like, okay, so now I know what I like. Now I can like go ask for it, because I no longer believe that like that makes me high maintenance or unattractive. Like that's actually like, men want that. Like and I can't even tell you, when I started experimenting with this, they'd be like, oh my God, I love that you know what you want. And like, I love that you're so clear in communicating what you need. And you're like, oh, so like literally everything I've been taught is a lie. Cool, cool, cool. Like, what? Like the way that they show up, they've just been waiting because they're equally like harmed by the patriarchy of like this mentality of like how we've been taught to operate. And to be like, it's just amazing to see that like when we finally start to do our own work, that like you're going to see that dynamic shift completely. So I think that's like what came up for me when you said that, of like that mindset piece is super huge. And you don't have to believe me, but I would definitely invite you to experiment with this idea that men love to serve and please women.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. The amount that I've done some experimenting with this myself as well, and the beauty that I see come through, it's not beauty, the brightness that I see come through men when they are given an opportunity to serve, rather than me going, oh, it's fine, I don't need any help, I can do this all by myself. Which it has been, I can't even tell you how strongly that has been drilled into me, and how strongly I felt that was so important. But it isn't. It's like actually really destructive. And when I started experimenting with this one myself, I just watched men just go bright and like lift their chests and be really excited that they were being asked to help with something. And I just thought,
And then you
wow,
praise them and they're like,
yeah. And it made me like, so I felt really bad as a woman, because I thought, gosh, I've been not inviting men to help me all my life. Think of all the times that's going to have meant then they haven't been able to shine, actually. And I feel like also one of the reasons I'm so excited to chat with you about this today, I feel like there's so much happening in our society in conversation around patriarchy and and shifting that mindset, because it is a mindset. It's not men per se. None of this is about pushing men down. It's about actually seeing that we as women have so much more power than we realize, to be able to, it's not lift men up, but light men up, I suppose. But
yes.
In order for them to be lit up, is about really honoring and wondering at us and helping us, and that kind of synergy blows my mind, actually.
Yep. And it's like, and it just starts with you doing this work, right?
Yeah,
and when you start to
exactly.
bring that out into other relationships, you'll see those dynamics start to shift, and it's wild. Like you will have that moment of like, holy shit, I've been doing life all wrong. Like, sorry, men. And also sorry to ourselves. Like but also compassion. Like we've literally been taught as women, like, do everything yourself. This independent woman conditioning is so real. And like that it's weak if we ask for help, and it's not like it's so nice for us, it's so nice for the other person. And yeah, that's like one of the biggest things I could say is like, do this and you will change your entire life.
Yeah, and also lifting other women up in that process as well, because that's probably one thing we haven't touched on. We're talking about all of these, I guess it's internal processes, but there can be, I'm independent, I'm strong, but there's also competition of I'm better than you because I'm doing this, or I'm more competent than you because I'm doing this, or I look prettier, or whatever. And yet there is beauty and majesty in every woman, every single woman, and more so when they are excited about and for other women, more than anything else.
Yeah, and I also like, I speak to this sometimes in my work too, of like, I think women are naturally, we like have this tendency that when we have something or when we feel good, we want others to have and to feel good too. Like that's just our go-to. Like if you ask women, like, what would you do if you had like more money, power, influence? I guarantee you that like they're gonna want to help other people. And like it's hard because sometimes it's like, well, I feel selfish if I want anything for myself. So that's like one piece to work on. But I naturally think that like as women rise and the more that we rise, the better it is for everybody. And like, we're not naturally competitive. It doesn't mean that like feeling jealousy or anything is bad. It just means that like naturally that's not the way that we operate. Like, we operate from a place of like community and rising with other people around us. And I think that when you come into your pleasure, then like you're not even worried about that stuff anymore. You're just like, oh yeah, like I feel so good. I want everyone to feel this, and like I can hold space for everybody to come into that as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. But until you touch into your pleasure, it's easy to drop into that old mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And it's reinforced by a lot of the things that we see around us in advertising and things like that, although there is
Yeah.
happening around that. So let's talk about pleasure lenses then, because if we're talking about pleasure is where the power is at, how do we start to dip into that zone so we can start to get into that space ourselves?
Yeah, great question. So I think this ties back perfectly to like the whole conversation of learning what you like. And again, this is like sensual, sexual, and not either. Like, it could just be preferences. And learning how to incorporate this into everything that you do, and give yourself this like permission and belief that like things can feel good, and that it's safe for things to feel good. Because I think a lot of times like we have other conditioning for whether it's trauma, societal things that have happened to you. And I would just say like go all in on pleasure research of like, what do I like? Ask other people what they like. Just experiment with things. Like, start to see everything of like, oh, well, if I'm just learning what I like, then I can't really mess this up. Like, I'm always just getting information and digesting all of that. But especially in our businesses, I think it's important to look at like, okay, what do I like doing? Again, getting rid of this mentality that we have to do it all, especially as entrepreneurs. Like, no one's expecting you to do this all yourself. Like, that again is like a recipe for burnout and disaster. Yeah. But just being like, okay, like what pieces of my business do I really like? What lights me up? Like, what feels fun? And if you believed that that was enough and that you didn't have to do it alone, like, then what would you do? And how would you show up and ask for help? But I also like, I do bring in sensual and sexual like pleasure into work too, right? So even if you are in a position where you have to do something that maybe is like not your favorite thing, you're not at a place where you could outsource it yet, of like, how could you make this task the most pleasurable experience that you can, right? And again, this is stuff that we don't really think with business, but it's like, okay, like set the mood, just like you were taking someone else on a date, or like whatever it was, like light a candle, like just get your senses involved in the whole experience, right? Like something that smells good, like wear something that you feel beautiful in, like set the scene, and then go do your accounting or whatever it's going to be. Like, you can bring pleasure into all of the situations, or you could just be sitting there being like in a boring ass meeting and you're just like doing hip circles or like quietly squeezing your pussy and nobody knows, but you're like sneaking pleasure into like the most mundane little moments of your day. And it sounds like so silly and little, but like when you start to do this, then you realize that like everything you do gets to feel good, and you'll find different ways, again, that pleasure lens, right? So you'll start to see how you can bring pleasure into every single thing that you do. And it just like more and more, you're like, okay, so like things just always feel good. And when they don't, you realize like, oh, what could I tweak here to make this feel better?
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. I can't tell you. That makes me very excited. Just the idea of encouraging women to take that approach generally, I think it's going to make the world a much happier place on every single level. So
everywhere. And like, again, like little things, like I'll just be like sitting on the train and I'll just like, I learned this one from Mama Gina, but it's so simple, but just like dragging your finger across like the outside of your palm. But like, it's like this instant pleasurable sensation. And then it doesn't matter like how many smelly, annoying people are standing around you, like during rush hour on a train or something. You're just like,
Like, it brings you into your body, doesn't it? And I think, and I feel like as women, we have minds that have the capacity, because we can go off in tangents and multiple different directions, which is actually our instinct and intuition, normally hearing fragments of things that are going on around us that maybe we don't realize. but we don't always know how to turn them around, and get into our body and kind of digest the information that we're getting. So we end up looping and running at 1,000,000 miles an hour in our heads, rather than getting into our bodies and getting into the sensation of pleasure. And as we access that, that seems to be part of the digestion of whatever it is that we're hearing all around of ourselves.
Totally.
So that's a great exercise. I love that, because it makes you present. You can't, gets you out of here, and it gets you into like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And then you're just, and you can bring this into anything you're doing, like in your business, in your life. If you have to make a decision, like come back into your body, come into pleasure for just a second. And like, if you ask yourself from that place, you're going to get a different answer than if you're just like up here in that loop, in that cycle of like, what should I do? And it's like, well, what would feel good to do? And when you come into pleasure again, your brain has that like, okay, this feels good. So like, what would the equivalent of that be in my business or in this situation that I'm in? And I think that can be really helpful for us to start making decisions and moving from that space instead of from logic and what we should do.
I love it. I feel like I want to ask the question, but I feel like we might have just hit it already. Is there anything you'd like to climax on in this interview? Any particular point? I feel like that's it. That's like so juicy what you've just said.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. Now we can just like,
Awesome. I love it.
That's such a good question also, by the way.
I love all the stuff that you said. I feel like we've touched on so many different areas. The only thing that I feel maybe would still be nice to just scratch the surface on a little bit would be maybe safety and vulnerability. If you're happy to speak to that, to just kind of land.
Anything like specific around it?
Well, we've just been talking about staying in your body over being in your mind, and one of the things that can sometimes stop women from getting into their body is because they're nervous to be vulnerable, because they feel like they might be attacked, so their brain is on guard. Like how can they, well, we've just spoke about how they can get into their body a little bit. How can
like stay in their body
with maybe some vulnerability and recognizing that that's powerful and safe?
Yeah. I mean, because it is like, it's one of the most beautiful things, and I also get that like no one wants to initiate the vulnerability. On the other side of it, you're like, wow, that's so beautiful. I feel so connected. I love this, whatever this person is in front of you, but you're like, I'm not going first. So a couple things is just remembering that like vulnerability usually leads to some kind of like beautiful connection, but like you do want to have a sense of like the person in front of you is able to receive you and like receive your vulnerability. But either way, I think it's also learning how to like resource a sense of safety inside of ourselves with ourselves. So, and this can be like whether you're just doing like, a pleasure exercise, whether there's someone on the other side of you, like all of this can feel vulnerable and like new. And so I think like finding a place in your body where you feel safe is so valuable, because you can take that with you and you can use that anytime. So if you can like, and this can change, but like even just if you take a deep breath and like, okay, like so today it feels like safe inside of like my chest or like around my heart. And just like breathe into that space and let it start to expand in your body. And again, like creating a sense of safety in your nervous system is really, really helpful. And you can do this in any scenario if you start to feel the activation, right? So you start to realize like, oh, I'm activated a little bit, like I'm getting a little bit red, or my heart's beating a little faster, or whatever those signs might be too. You could be like, okay, let me resource a sense of safety of knowing like I'm okay here. And of course, like you want to check in and make sure you're actually okay. I just stress that. But a lot of times our nervous systems are going to activate when they don't need to be, because of conditioning and what our brain's doing and all of these things. And also just like finding the space around you as safety. Like a lot of times I'll start my coaching session with just like, okay, just feel like the fact that you have a chair under your butt, you have four walls around you, you have a ceiling over your head, like you have physical safety in this moment to be able to go here right now. And so sometimes we need to create that in a situation, even if you're about to have like a difficult conversation with someone, it's like, oh yeah, I'm safe and I can do this. And then like the deeper work, of course, is like creating trust that you're going to be okay. You have resiliency, like no matter what happens in a situation. And that can be really hard again if you have like trauma or something in the past that needs healing or that constantly is coming up for you.
I love it. Okay. And that's so beautiful. Thank you. That's really beautiful. I love the practice of the chair underneath you and the four walls around you. Again, just gets you present and in your body. It's that seems to be where the power is at, really, isn't it? It's getting in the physical.
Here.
Yeah, landing in all the way down, right into our tip.
Because we really we live up here, which is fine, but it's not the most like pleasurable and potent place that you can come from.
No.
And when you start to do a different way, you'll realize that we want to like stay in our bodies. And there's a lot that can bring us out, right? So we're constantly practicing, and sometimes it's just your breath or touch or whatever the practice is.
Yeah, beautiful. And then if we're talking about just to final point to wrap it up, really, we're talking about creating goals using pleasure. So how would you, what's a really simple, maybe 1, 2 or 3 step process that you would take to create a goal using pleasure?
Yeah, what would be the best way to like take someone through goals using pleasure? Because again, I think like probably the first layers that are going to come up are your shoulds, like these conditioned goals. And so get into your body, like do not attempt to like make and create goals or have this conversation until you're in your body, right? So a great way to do that is like activate all 5 senses. So again, set the environment for you to even be doing this. Like if you want to journal on your goals, if you're going to have a conversation about it, like get something that smells good, get something that tastes good, like touch things, like bring that sense of everything because you're going to be in your body. And then create like just connecting from there of seeing like, okay, like what would my goals be from here? Like what excites me and me alone? And then the next step is like trusting those. Cause I think sometimes it's like, you're going to hear things, you'll be like, that makes no sense. Like I'm not doing that. So it's like getting into pleasure, asking yourself what those would be, and then trusting those and moving forward with those of like whatever the next right step is. And I think also just sharing them, like being witnessed in them is a really beautiful way to like bring pleasure into them. Because sometimes we're like, we have so much stuff around like if I say anything I'm gonna like jinx it or someone will steal it or all these different things. So like being witness in your goals, your desires is so beautiful. So having someone of like, hey, can I share with you like what I'm desiring or what I'm working on? And again, this could be your business, this could be with a partner, that like in a friendship, like so many different things. And you can just say like, hey, just want to be witnessed in my goals or my desires. And then like let yourself be seen in what you want is another way to like just take up space, to be seen, to be vulnerable, and to like have this practice, and to like hold them as like really sacred desires, and they're just for you. Like you're not asking for feedback or advice or anything, and we can teach people around us to do that. Yeah, like I think that's my uncomplicated version.
I absolutely love it because I can feel it. Thank you, Julia. I'm so alive from the conversation that we've just been having, and I'm so excited to be sharing this with people, and really excited to hear their feedback and comments and conversations and questions that they might have or statements that they've got about, you know, how they're using pleasure in their lives, or how maybe they've experimented with pleasure since watching this. How can, is it, but before we finish up totally, just is there any, you've mentioned Pussy, a Reclamation by Regina Thomas Hauser. Is there any other books or apps or anything that you'd recommend for women?
I mean, I think that's a great place to start. I would ask your pussy, or even just like set this desire of like, I want to learn more about pussy and pleasure. Like, what would you have me do? And I guarantee you, like, somebody in your life is going to bring this up. You're going to see an ad on Facebook, like something's going to happen, and just start following these little pieces and see where they take you, because there's a million directions you could go here. Yeah. And if you want like support in doing that, or a community to do that, I welcome you into mine. We're all always doing.
Awesome. So whereabouts can people find you?
Yeah, so on Facebook, I have a private group for those who identify as women. It's called Visible AF. You can come request to join. We practice taking up space, being vulnerable in both the shininess and like the slouchy, like stuckness. And then I have a podcast, Wait, What the Fuck, that launches September 24th. That will have a ton of good information about like why you didn't learn this stuff. And then on Instagram, Julia Motherfucking Wells, and I share a lot over there as well.
Awesome. I love it, Julia. Thank you so much for all that you've shared. Thank you for who you are and for what you've explored and opening up and blossoming in yourself. It's just an honor and a joy to witness you. And yeah, just thank you. Really, really thank you.
Thank you. So many good things.
Awesome.
For a tool I designed to support you opening your body and sharpening your intuition, check out Roll Me Open at www.rollmeopen.com.